Diane stood on my porch at 11 at night, rain soaking through her coat, holding a single suitcase, and said the 6 words I never expected to hear from my ex-wife's mother. I had nowhere else to go. I hadn't spoken to her in almost a year. Not since the divorce papers were signed. Not since the last stiff, polite goodbye at a custody handoff neither of us had wanted to make eye contact through. And 6 months after that knock, I'd be standing in a parking lot getting screamed at by my ex-wife for something I never planned on, never expected, and, if I'm honest with you right now, still don't fully know how to explain to anyone who wasn't there for all of it. This is that story. I need to back up, because none of what happened that night makes sense without understanding who Diane actually was in my life before any of this started. I was married to Megan for 6 years. It ended about a year before Diane showed up on my porch, and it ended for reasons that had nothing to do with Diane. Megan and I had just slowly grown into 2 different people who wanted different things. The kind of ending that's sad without being anyone's fault, though divorces rarely stay that clean once lawyers and custody schedules get involved. Diane, Megan's mother, had been one of the genuinely good things about that marriage. From the very first dinner I had with Megan's family, years earlier, Diane had treated me like I mattered. Not performatively, not the careful politeness some in-laws manage, but actual warmth. She taught me how to make her lasagna recipe, badly, over the course of about 6 attempts one winter. She was the one who talked me through my nerves before I proposed to Megan, sitting at her kitchen table, telling me exactly which restaurant would have the best lighting for the ring photo. When Megan and I had our daughter Sophie, Diane was in the delivery room, and she was the one who caught my eye across that hospital room in the middle of the chaos and mouthed, silently, "You're doing great," at exactly the moment I needed to hear it. I remember another moment, too, from a few years into the marriage, that I hadn't thought about in a long time until everything that happened later made me reconsider it. Megan and I had gone through a rough patch, nothing that ended the marriage then, just an ordinary difficult stretch, and Diane had taken me aside at a family barbecue and told me, quietly, that she could see how hard I was trying, and that trying counted for more than people gave it credit for. I remember feeling, in that moment, unusually seen by someone who technically owed me nothing beyond basic in-law civility. I filed that feeling away without examining it too closely at the time. I've examined it plenty since. So when the marriage ended, I didn't just lose Megan, I lost Diane too, in a quieter, less acknowledged way that nobody really talks about when they talk about divorce. Nobody sends you a card for that particular loss. You just quietly stop being invited to things, stop being someone she calls, and you're supposed to accept that as the natural order of things, because she's your ex-wife's mother, not yours, and whatever bond existed was apparently only ever borrowed. I saw her exactly twice in the year after the divorce, both times at custody handoffs for Sophie, both times brief and stilted, both of us clearly unsure what the rules were now, for 2 people who used to genuinely like each other and now had no clear reason to speak at all. I had absolutely no reason to expect her at my door at 11 o'clock on a rainy Tuesday night, 10 months after the divorce was finalized. I was up late that night, working on something for my job, when I heard 3 knocks. Soft, hesitant, almost apologetic, the exact opposite of the confident, capable woman I remembered. I opened the door, and it took me a full second to process that it was actually Diane standing there, hair plastered to her face from the rain, a single suitcase beside her, looking smaller and more uncertain than I'd ever seen her look in 6 years of knowing her. "Diane," I said, genuinely stunned. Are you okay?" "I'm sorry," she said, and I could hear in her voice that she'd been crying, or was very close to it. "I know this is insane. I know I have no right to show up at your door like this. I didn't know where else to go tonight. I promise I'll explain, and if you want me to leave, I understand completely, but I couldn't be alone tonight, and every other option I had felt worse than this one." I stepped back and let her in without asking a single question, some part of me registering that whatever was happening mattered more right now than any awkwardness about the timeline of our relationship. I want to pause on that instinct for a moment, because I think it matters. There's a version of that night where I hesitate on the threshold, where I ask a careful, reasonable question about why she's really there, before deciding whether to let her in, where the whole rest of this story simply never happens, because I treated the moment with the caution it might have technically deserved. I didn't do that. I've thought about why, plenty of times since. I think some part of me had spent the year since the divorce quietly missing the specific warmth Diane had always offered me, missing it more than I'd let myself admit, and some instinct older than caution recognized an opportunity to have that back before my conscious mind had finished processing what was actually happening. She sat on my couch, shivering slightly, and I got her a towel and made tea, and it took her almost 20 minutes before she was steady enough to actually tell me what had happened. Her husband, Robert, Megan's father, a quiet, steady man I'd always liked, had died 8 months earlier. Sudden, a stroke, no warning. I hadn't known. Nobody had told me, which, looking back, made a kind of painful sense. I wasn't family anymore, not in any way that would put me on a phone call list for that kind of news. "I've been staying with my sister since it happened," Diane said. "The house Robert and I had, it was too much, financially, to keep on my own, and too full of him to want to keep anyway. But tonight my sister and her husband had a fight, a bad one, and things got said that I don't think are going to be easily taken back, and I couldn't stay in that house another night feeling like I was in the middle of somebody else's collapsing marriage, on top of everything else I've already lost this year." "Why here?" I asked, gently, because I needed to understand. "You could have gone to a hotel. You could have called Megan." Diane was quiet for a moment. "Megan and I aren't as close as we used to be," she said. "That's its own long story, and not one I necessarily want to unpack tonight." And a hotel felt like admitting I genuinely had nowhere real to go, which felt like too much to sit with alone tonight, on top of everything else. "You were the first name I thought of. I don't fully know how to explain that, except that some part of me has always felt safer around you than I probably should admit to my own daughter." I told her more, that first night, than I think either of us expected her to share. How Robert had, in his final year, started distancing himself in small ways she hadn't fully understood at the time, ways that had left her feeling isolated even before his death made the isolation permanent. How the last real conversation they'd had, the morning of the stroke, had been about something trivial, a broken garbage disposal, and how she'd give almost anything to have that final memory be about something that mattered instead. "I keep thinking I should have known," she said. "Some sign I missed. Some warning I should have caught. It doesn't matter that the doctors told me there wasn't one. I keep looking for it anyway." "That sounds exhausting," I said. "Looking for a sign that wasn't there." "It is," she said. "But it's easier than accepting that sometimes things just happen, with no warning and no lesson attached to them. I think I'd rather feel guilty than feel powerless. At least guilt gives me something to do with the grief." I told her she could stay as long as she needed. I meant it as a simple, decent thing to offer someone who clearly needed it. I had no idea, that night, that it was going to become something else entirely. Diane stayed for what was supposed to be a few days while she figured out a longer-term plan. A few days became a few weeks. I want to be honest about how ordinary that stretch of time actually was, because I think it matters to understanding what eventually grew out of it. She cooked, mostly because she said it helped her feel useful, and I hadn't eaten a proper home-cooked meal in longer than I wanted to admit. We fell into an easy rhythm. She'd have dinner ready some evenings when I got home from work. I'd help her sort through the logistics of her financial situation, which turned out to be more precarious than she'd initially let on, since Robert had handled most of their finances and left things more tangled than either of them probably intended. We talked, most nights, for hours, about Robert, about grief, about the specific loneliness of losing a spouse after almost 3 decades of marriage, a loneliness I obviously couldn't fully understand, but could at least sit with her through. She talked about Megan too, carefully, and I learned things I hadn't known even during 6 years of marriage, that Diane and Megan had been drifting for longer than I'd realized, some tension between them that predated my divorce from Megan entirely, rooted in old disagreements about Diane's own choices earlier in her life that Megan had apparently never fully forgiven. About 3 weeks in, Sophie came to stay with me for her regular custody weekend, and I watched something genuinely beautiful happen. My 4-year-old daughter, delighted beyond reason to discover her grandmother was staying at Daddy's house, climbing into Diane's lap the moment she arrived, and refusing to leave it for most of the weekend. Diane cried a little, watching Sophie fall asleep against her that first night, and told me later it was the first time in months she'd felt like her life still had some kind of purpose attached. That weekend became something of a pattern over the following weeks. Diane and Sophie built an entire elaborate ritual around making pancakes shaped like animals, badly, both of them laughing at the increasingly unrecognizable results. I'd come downstairs some Saturday mornings to find flour dusted across the counter, and the two of them deep in concentration over what was supposedly meant to be a giraffe pancake, but looked considerably more like a small, deformed cloud. Watching them together did something to me I wasn't fully prepared for. Some quiet, growing awareness that this specific configuration of people, however unconventional, felt more like a family than anything I'd experienced in the year since the divorce. I noticed something shifting in myself during those weeks too. Something I didn't fully want to name yet. I noticed I was looking forward to coming home in a way I hadn't in longer than I could remember. I noticed I liked hearing about her day, liked the sound of her voice from the kitchen when I walked in, liked the specific, easy comfort of a house that didn't feel empty anymore. I told myself, for a while, that this was just companionship. Two people who'd both lost something significant, finding some comfort in each other's presence. I believed that story for longer than I probably should have, mostly because the alternative felt too complicated to sit with, honestly. I remember, more than once, catching myself staring a beat too long while she laughed at something on the television, or noticing the specific way she said my name when she called me in for dinner, and quickly redirecting my attention elsewhere, unwilling to examine what those small moments actually meant. The night everything shifted happened almost 2 months after she first knocked on my door, on an evening that started as ordinarily as any of the others. We were sitting on the back porch after dinner, the way we often did, and Diane was telling a story about Robert, a funny one for once, about a camping trip early in their marriage that had gone comically wrong. And I watched her laugh, really laugh, for the first time in weeks, head tilted back, the specific unguarded laugh I remembered from years earlier, before grief had quieted most of what used to come easily to her. I'd noticed, over the preceding weeks, small things accumulating that I'd been carefully not examining too closely. The way I'd started looking forward to these porch conversations more than almost anything else in my day. The way I found myself remembering little details she'd mentioned days earlier, and bringing them up again just to watch her face light up that someone had been paying that close attention. I'd told myself, repeatedly, that this was simply what it looked like to be a good friend to someone going through a hard time. I'd started to suspect, somewhere underneath that explanation, that I was lying to myself about the category this actually belonged to. Something about watching her laugh like that made something in my chest tighten in a way I couldn't pretend was purely platonic anymore. "What?" she asked, catching me looking at her. "Nothing," I said, too quickly. "You're a bad liar," she said, still smiling. "You always were. It's one of the things I liked about you, actually, back when you were dating Megan. Most young men trying to impress a girlfriend's parents perform a version of themselves. You never did. You were just always exactly who you were, awkward pauses and all." "I need to say something," I said, before I could talk myself out of it. "And I need you to know I've been fighting with myself about whether it's insane to say it out loud." She went quiet, watching me carefully. "I don't think what's been happening the last 2 months is just companionship anymore," I said. "At least not for me. I think I look forward to seeing you in a way that stopped feeling like just gratitude for good company. And I know exactly how complicated that is. I know every reason this shouldn't be something either of us says out loud. I just didn't want to keep pretending I wasn't feeling it, because pretending felt worse, somehow, than the risk of telling you the truth and having you tell me I'm wrong." Diane didn't say anything for a long time, long enough that I started genuinely bracing for her to ask me to leave, or worse, to pack her own bag and go, horrified at what I'd just said. "I've felt it too," she finally said, quiet, careful. For a while longer than I've wanted to admit to myself, I kept telling myself it was grief confusing things, or loneliness, or some combination of both, because the alternative felt like something I had no right to feel. "You were married to my daughter. You're the father of my granddaughter. There's no version of this that isn't going to be complicated, for both of us, and probably devastating for people we both love." "I know," I said. "I'm not saying no," she said. "I need you to understand that clearly. I'm saying I need us both to go into this with our eyes open about what it's going to cost, because I don't think either of us can pretend Megan is going to take this well." I didn't know yet, that night, exactly how right she was. We were careful, for a while, deliberately slow about all of it, both of us aware of exactly how much was at stake if this went wrong. But 4 months in, Megan found out. Not from either of us telling her directly, which in hindsight was probably our first mistake, but from Sophie, 4 years old and utterly incapable of understanding why Grandma living with Daddy, and Daddy holding Grandma's hand at breakfast, was supposed to be a secret. Megan showed up at my house on a Saturday afternoon, and I want to tell you honestly, I have never in my life seen someone as purely, completely furious as Megan was that day. "Get out here," she said, standing in my driveway, not even willing to come inside. "Both of you. Now." Diane came outside, and I watched her face go pale, watched years of careful, complicated hope collapse into visible dread in real time. "How long?" Megan said, voice shaking, somewhere between rage and something that sounded almost like grief. "How long has this been going on? My mother, my father's wife, in my ex-husband's house, in my daughter's second home, and neither of you thought that was worth telling me directly, instead of letting a 4-year-old accidentally spill it over pancakes." "Megan," Diane started, "please, let me explain." "Explain what?" Megan cut in. "Explain how my mother, 8 months after burying my father, ended up in my ex-husband's bed? There is no explanation for this that doesn't sound completely insane, Mom. This isn't a normal thing. This isn't something people are supposed to be okay with." I stepped forward, because I could see Diane visibly shrinking under the weight of her daughter's anger in a way I couldn't just watch happen silently. "This isn't her fault alone," I said. "I'm the one who said something first. If you're angry, be angry at me too, not just at her." "Oh, I'm angry at both of you," Megan said. "Believe me, but you," she turned back to Diane, "you're supposed to be my mother. You're supposed to have some instinct that tells you this crosses a line that shouldn't be crossed, no matter how lonely you are, no matter how kind he was to you. There are other lonely people in the world you could have found comfort with. Did it have to be him?" "I didn't plan this," Diane said, her voice breaking. "I know how it looks. I know exactly how it looks, Megan. I've spent months being terrified of this exact conversation, because I know there's no version of explaining it that makes it sound like anything other than what you're accusing it of being. But I didn't set out looking for this. I showed up here in the middle of the worst year of my life, with nowhere else to go, and somewhere in the middle of trying to survive that, I found something I didn't expect to find again at 53 years old, and I am not going to apologize for it, just because it's inconvenient and complicated for everyone around us." "It's not inconvenient," Megan said. "It's humiliating. Do you understand that? Everyone is going to know. Your sister, Dad's whole side of the family. Sophie is going to grow up with this as some bizarre fact about her family that she has to explain to people for the rest of her life. Did either of you think about her, even once, before you decided this was worth the fallout?" That question landed harder than anything else Megan had said, because it was, honestly, the fair one. The one Diane and I had been quietly avoiding fully confronting ourselves. "I think about Sophie every single day," I said. "I think about what this looks like from the outside constantly. But I also think about the fact that she's watched her grandmother laugh again for the first time in months, watched 2 adults in her life who love her take care of each other during an incredibly hard year. I don't think hiding that from her, or ending it out of fear of what other people will say, actually protects her more than being honest does." "That's convenient logic," Megan said, "when the honesty benefits you directly." "I understand why it sounds that way," I said. "I don't have a way to prove to you right now that it isn't just convenient logic. I can only tell you that I've turned this over more times than I can count, trying to find the version where this is actually about protecting Sophie and not just about what I want, and I keep landing in the same place. I don't think love has to look conventional to still be real, and I don't think Sophie is better off growing up believing that the people who love her have to hide parts of themselves to be acceptable." Megan didn't have an answer for that right away. She stood in that driveway for a long moment, arms crossed, visibly working through something she clearly hadn't fully resolved for herself yet. I watched something in her face shift, almost imperceptibly, from pure fury toward something more exhausted, more complicated, the specific look of someone trying to hold 2 contradictory feelings at once, and not quite managing it. "I need time," she finally said. "I'm not saying I'm okay with this. I'm not there. I don't know if I'll ever fully be there, but I need time before I can even look at either of you without wanting to scream, so I'm going to take that time, and I need you both to let me, instead of pushing for some fast resolution because it's uncomfortable for you to sit with my anger." She left without another word, and Diane cried for a long time that night, convinced she'd permanently broken something with her daughter that no amount of time was going to fix. I sat with her on that same back porch until almost 2 in the morning, not trying to fix anything, just staying, because I'd learned by then that some nights the only thing you can actually offer someone is your presence and the willingness not to leave. Megan didn't speak to either of us directly for almost 3 months after that driveway conversation. Custody handoffs for Sophie happened through terse, functional texts, scheduled with a formality that made clear exactly how much distance she'd put between us. Those months were hard on Diane, in a way I don't think I fully appreciated until I watched her go through it up close. She lost her husband, then largely lost her relationship with her sister over an unrelated fight, and now found herself estranged from her only daughter over a relationship she couldn't take back even if she'd wanted to, because she didn't want to take it back. She just wanted her daughter's forgiveness for something she didn't actually believe was wrong. Her sister Carol found out about us during that same stretch, through the family grapevine rather than directly from Diane, and the reaction was, if anything, harsher than Megan's had been. Carol called Diane one evening, and I could hear enough of the conversation from across the room to understand the shape of it even without every word. Accusations of impropriety. Questions about what people at Robert's memorial service would think if they knew. A level of judgment that left Diane sitting at my kitchen table afterward, quiet and hollowed out in a way I hadn't seen since that first rainy night. She asked me if I'd been planning this the whole time Robert was alive, Diane told me, voice flat with exhaustion, as if grief just conveniently unlocked feelings that were secretly there for years. I don't even know how to begin defending myself against an accusation that ugly. There's no way to prove a negative like that. You just have to sit there and let someone believe the worst version of you, because arguing only makes you sound more guilty. You don't owe her a defense, I said. You know what's true. That has to be enough, even when it doesn't feel like enough. It doesn't feel like enough tonight, she admitted. I know, I said. It doesn't have to, tonight. It just has to be true. I keep thinking about what kind of mother this makes me, she told me one night, about 6 weeks into the silence. Whether Megan's right, and I should have found some way to want this less, for her sake. Do you actually believe that? I asked. Or are you just tired of being punished for something you didn't choose to feel? She thought about it for a long time. I think I believe I'm allowed to have found something good in the middle of an awful year, she finally said. I just don't know how to hold that belief and my daughter's pain at the same time without one of them collapsing under the weight of the other. I didn't have a clean answer for her. I'm not sure there was one. All I could do was keep showing up, the same way I'd learned to show up for things that scared me, and trust that time might do some of the work neither of us could force. It was Sophie, in the end, who cracked something open, the way kids sometimes do without meaning to carry that kind of weight. During one custody handoff, in the driveway, 4-year-old and characteristically blunt, she looked up at her mother and asked why Mommy didn't come inside and see Grandma anymore, since Grandma always asked about her and seemed sad when Mommy's name came up. Megan, according to what she told me much later, hadn't had a good answer ready for that question, and it apparently sat with her for days afterward, in a way none of my own arguments in the driveway ever had. There's something about hearing your own avoidance reflected back at you through a 4-year-old's plain, unfiltered logic that adults can't easily talk themselves out of the way they can talk past each other's more complicated objections. She told me later that she'd tried, for those few days, to construct an answer she could actually give Sophie, some version of, it's complicated, that a 4-year-old could understand, and that Megan herself could still believe. She said she kept failing to find one that didn't sound, even to her own ears, like an adult protecting her own discomfort at the expense of a child's straightforward question. Grandma loves someone. Why is that bad? She told me she'd sat with that exact question, phrased almost exactly that simply, for the better part of a week before she finally picked up the phone. Megan called me that night, the first time she'd called directly since everything came out. I'm not calling because I've suddenly decided I'm fine with this, she said. I want to be really clear about that. I'm calling because my daughter just asked me why I'm punishing her grandmother for loving someone, and I didn't have a good answer for a 4-year-old, which means I probably don't have a good answer for myself either. I'm not going to pretend this is simple, I said. It's not. I understand if it takes you a long time to actually be okay with it, if you ever fully get there. But I don't think either of us is asking you to pretend it doesn't feel strange. We're just asking you not to lose your mother over something that, at the end of the day, made her genuinely happy again during the hardest year of her life. Megan was quiet for a long moment. Can I talk to her? She finally asked. Just her, first, not you. I need to hear it from her before I can figure out where I actually stand. I told her, of course, and I meant it. This was never a conversation that needed me in the room to be resolved. Some things have to happen directly between the two people who actually share the history, without a third person's presence complicating the honesty of it. That conversation between Megan and Diane happened a few days later, over almost 3 hours, most of which I wasn't present for, and don't fully know the contents of, because Diane told me, gently, that some of it needed to stay just between her and her daughter. What I do know is that it was the beginning of something slowly, imperfectly repairing. Megan is not, even now, fully at ease with all of this. She's told me as much, directly, more than once. But she comes to family gatherings again. She lets Sophie see her grandmother without the tension that used to accompany every visit. She's civil with me in a way that took real effort to rebuild, and I don't take that effort for granted. Diane and I have been together for almost 2 years now. We don't make a spectacle of it. We're not interested in convincing anyone it's a conventional story, because it isn't, and pretending otherwise would be its own kind of dishonesty. What I can tell you is that on the 2-year anniversary of the night she knocked on my door, soaked from the rain, holding one suitcase and absolutely nothing else, we sat on that same back porch, and she told me something I've thought about often since. "I used to think losing Robert was the worst thing that could happen to me that year," she said. "And then I thought losing my relationship with Megan, even temporarily, might be worse. But somewhere underneath all of that loss, I found something I genuinely didn't expect to find again. And I've decided I'm not willing to apologize for that anymore, even to the people who love me and still find it hard to understand." Carol, Diane's sister, has come around slowly, in fits and starts, though the relationship between them still carries a formality it didn't have before, an edge that hasn't fully worn off and maybe never will. Diane has made peace with that in a way I admire. She doesn't chase Carol's approval anymore, doesn't perform apology for something she doesn't believe requires one, but she keeps the door open, patiently, in case time does more work than either of them can force on their own. I remember the first family gathering after Megan's initial thaw, a small birthday party for Sophie, low-key, mostly close relatives, and how carefully everyone in that room seemed to be managing their own reactions to Diane and me standing together near the kitchen island. Nobody said anything overtly unkind. Nobody had to. There was a specific quality to the silence that fell whenever we entered a conversation, a slight recalibration in how people positioned themselves, that told me exactly how much work still remained even after the loudest parts of the conflict had quieted down. Diane noticed it too. She squeezed my hand under the table at one point, not for comfort exactly, more like an acknowledgement. "We see this. We're choosing to stay anyway. This too is part of what we signed up for." Megan, for her part, has become something closer to what she was before, though it took the better part of a year to get there fully. She still tells me, on the rare occasions we talk about it directly, that some part of it will probably always feel strange to her, and I've learned not to push for more resolution than that. Strange but accepted is, I've come to believe, sometimes the most honest outcome available, and I've stopped needing it to become anything cleaner than that. Sophie, 6 now, has no memory of any period where this wasn't simply how her family was configured. To her, Diane living with me isn't a scandal or a complication. It's just Saturday morning pancakes, badly shaped, and a grandmother who tucks her in on the weekends she stays with us. I think about that sometimes, how the next generation inherits whatever shape you build without carrying the weight of how strange it looked to get there, and I find something quietly hopeful in that. I think about that 11 o'clock knock often, how close I came to not opening the door with any real understanding of what I was actually letting into my life that night. I think about how easy it would have been to offer her a hotel recommendation instead, to keep things simple, uncomplicated, appropriately distant. I don't think either of us regrets that we didn't. If there's one thing I've taken from all of this, it's that love doesn't always arrive in a shape anyone expects, or approves of, or finds easy to explain at a dinner party. Sometimes it shows up soaked in rain at 11 at night, holding a single suitcase, saying the truest sentence either of you will hear that year: "I had nowhere else to go." And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let that person in anyway, and stay honest about where it leads, even when it costs you people you love along the way, and even when getting them back takes far longer, and far more work, than you ever expected it would. I think too about how differently this could have gone if either of us had made a different choice at any of the several points where a different choice was available. If I'd handed her a hotel's phone number instead of a spare room that first night. If I'd stayed quiet on that back porch instead of saying something I couldn't take back once it was said. If Diane had decided the risk to her relationship with Megan wasn't worth whatever she was feeling, and had quietly let it go before either of us ever spoke it out loud. Any one of those smaller, quieter choices could have redirected the entire story into something unremarkable. Two people who shared a strange, complicated year, and then drifted back into the distant, formal relationship the divorce had already assigned them. I don't think either of us regrets that we made the choices we actually made instead. I think we both understand, now, 2 years out, that the cost was real. Carol's continued distance, the year of near silence with Megan, the whispered conversations at family gatherings that still happen sometimes when people think we're out of earshot. But I think we've both also come to believe that the alternative, the version where we quietly let it go to keep things simple for everyone else, would have cost something too. Something quieter and slower and, in its own way, sadder. Two people who found something rare in the middle of a genuinely terrible year, choosing to let it go unspoken because it was inconvenient for the people around them. We didn't choose that version. I'm glad, every single day, that we didn't. If this one got you, tell me in the comments. And if you want more real stories like this, subscribe. There's a new one waiting for you every week.